Okay, now we are live. And good evening to everyone who is with us today for our webinar this evening. And I have with me Arthur, who is Climate Tracker's campaigns manager. I also have with us Ben Muni of Greenpeace. Say hi. And Purple Romero from Channel News Asia. So today we'll be
Hello
talking
guys.
about
Good evening.
Today we'll be talking about renewable energy in Southeast Asia and the role of media in influencing, policies and probably influencing our leaders here in the Southeast Asian region. And this webinar will actually help you get into our workshop, which will be happening in the Philippines. So Arthur, can you tell us more about the workshop that Climate Tracker is, holding globally and which will start in the Philippines this August?
Hey guys, I'm Arthur. So like Ayin said, we'll be holding a workshop in the Philippines very soon, on the 4th and 6th of August. And this workshop is part of a series of several workshops which will help you prepare to become a professional climate change journalist. Will help you to improve your writing skills, get a better idea on how to write about climate change. And if you'd like to join that workshop, we would like to ask you to write an article about the renewable energy revolution in Southeast Asia. And to help you better understand what you could write about and what the challenges are to become a proper climate change journalist, we have two experts with us who will help you get a better understanding of the topic you'd like to write about. But if you have any more questions about the workshop in particular, about what you have to write, when you have to write it, you can also just ask questions on the right side of the YouTube video. You can also, if you would not follow this, also still ask questions on the Facebook page underneath the video if you would want to come back to this video later on when it's not live. So we really look forward to your articles because then you make a chance to join our workshop. That's really important. And we'd like to now give the floor to two media experts who will have about an hour time to discuss the climate change journalism landscape, the media landscape in Southeast Asia, and what the difficulties are there. And Ayin will introduce them shortly. They are Ben Muni from Greenpeace and Purple Romero from Channel News Asia. So enjoy talk with them, and remember, if you have any questions, just ask them on the side of this video. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks, Arthur. So Arthur will keep tabs on the questions, which we will also address later on. Let's start with Ben, actually, Ben Muni from Greenpeace. We'd like to talk about first, what is the renewable energy situation and even fossil fuel situation in Southeast Asia. We'll start with this topic, and then later on we'll hand on to Purple, who will talk about, journalism, how we can cover fossil fuel and climate change and renewable energy stories, and how we can publish them on media. So, Ben, tell us more about the situation of renewable energy in the Philippines and Southeast Asia.
Okay, thank you, Ayin. In the Philippines, basically, well, in Southeast Asia, basically you have several countries who are part of the top 10 or top 20 countries worldwide that have coal power plant projects that are in the pipeline. So you have Indonesia and Vietnam that are part of the top 10, and the Philippines and Thailand that are part of the top 20. So this is, I'm talking about coal because it's easier to understand the situation for renewable energy by starting with what hinders the development of renewable energy in Southeast Asia. So in the latest boom and bust report that was released by the Global Coal Tracker in March 2017, you have these countries. So if you look at the current energy landscape in Southeast Asia, coal is one of the dominant, if not the most dominant source of energy in many Southeast Asian countries. And as one observer put it, Southeast Asia is beginning to look like the last stronghold of the coal industry worldwide. Hence, Southeast Asia is a major battleground for the fight against fossil fuels globally. Now, if you look at the impacts of coal expansion in Southeast Asia, as mentioned, given the wide or the number of of countries that there are proposed coal plants for expansion and also new ones, we're looking at a significant scenario that relates to air pollution in Southeast Asia. So one of the impacts is respiratory diseases. No, so way back in 2016, Greenpeace has published a Southeast Asian report on the possible number of deaths that we can calculate, no, from the impacts of coal-fired power plant pollution in Southeast Asia. Now, this problem is not only happening in one country, but it is a problem that is happening across Southeast Asia. Now, in terms of renewable energy in Southeast Asia is growing at a slow but steady pace. We can say that the Philippines and Thailand are among the leaders for solar energy, and the Philippines and Vietnam are leading the pack for wind energy. Vietnam has a very high potential for hydropower, so they just decided to scrap all plans to put up nuclear power plants as of last year. So it's a good sign. But in many other countries like Indonesia, Myanmar, the Mekong region countries like Laos, coal is on the rise, especially with Indonesia being among one of the top coal exporters in the world. So if you look at the overall scenario of both coal and renewable energy in Southeast Asia, there is really that major battle between these two sources of energy that's happening. So as I mentioned earlier, Southeast Asia is being seen as the last stronghold of the coal industry, of the global coal industry. So what happens in Southeast Asia will not stay in Southeast Asia, but rather it will have impacts across the world. One of the most important developments in the renewable energy landscape in Southeast Asia is how China is shaping the economics of scale for the production of renewable energy technologies. So for the second consecutive year, China is the leading country in terms of wind and solar energy installed globally. So this has significant impacts on Southeast Asia, given that most of the technology, or rather the manufacture of the technology that we're using for renewable energy comes from China. At the same time, you also have investments, significant investments on coal coming from countries like China, Japan, and South Korea. So these three East Asian countries, China, Japan, and South Korea, are among the top financiers of the coal expansion in Southeast Asia. So the way to look at both renewable energy development and coal-fired power plant expansion in Southeast Asia is to relate it with the bigger East Asian market and uh, bigger East Asian energy landscape.
Okay, so thank you, Ben, for an overall, like an overview of the renewable energy and coal issue in Southeast Asia. And you mentioned earlier that one way to cover this is actually to relate it to the bigger East Asia problem of investing in coal, such as in China, in Japan, and South Korea. So maybe I can ask Purple, what kind of stories can we actually get from what Ben told us earlier? How can our trackers get to know what kind of stories can have an impact in policy, or maybe get their leaders to notice what they are writing about renewable energy or coal?
um, to be able to come up with stories that will get responses from political leaders across the region, it's important to highlight the common problems or issues that the countries face. Ben earlier mentioned about the respiratory diseases, and that's been happening since day one, especially with the interregional problem with pollution. So it's something that we have to look back again. Whenever there's haze, for example, in Indonesia coming from palm oil, sorry, the palm trees deforestation, the smog reaches Singapore and then Malaysia. But it's something that the ASEAN region and ASEAN as a political bloc hasn't really talked about in a strong manner. So that's one issue that has to really be taken up by the media. And there's one way of localizing it. So we can talk about it in a regional manner, and you can talk about it in a way that's more local. For one, for Indonesians, you can talk to both sides that are affected by possibly curbing palm oil use or the use of dirty energy, and then also talk to those people who are pushing for a transition to renewable energy. We do not want to alienate anyone. I think that's one common mistake that the media sometimes commit, that in our pursuit to highlight um, our objectives, or to push for the changes that we want to see, we tend to alienate other sectors, and that's not really how we do it. We do not want to continue preaching to the choir. So for those sectors who continue to support dirty energy, as we call it, we have to go to them and then ask them why are you still doing it, even if you know that it has consequences on your health, on the health of your family, on the health of your community. So always when you ask the question why, do so in a way that we really in a manner where we really want to understand where they're coming from. So does it localize the issue by talking to all sectors concerned, and then by doing that you can comprehensively address the problem, talk about the problem, and then conversely, you can talk about what solutions are there and how possible or feasible the solutions are. Talk about those who are employed by companies in the palm oil industry, for one. um, the main problem that they will raise is that, well, we will lose our job. So what is the solution that can be offered by those who are pushing for renewable energy? So a language that can be understood by anyone, by everyone. So talking the language of health, right? Money, that's second, and then policy. These are intertwined issues. If you're pushing for changes as a journalist, um, you have to identify how these issues, the intersectionality of these issues. If you talk about climate change, many aspects. If you talk about RE, one, you can talk about technology if you want to make it so sexy. There's a startup from Singapore, there's a startup from Indonesia that is exploring RE. And a startup for those in the business industry or sector, it's one really of the hot button issues right now. So we have here a young group of people, a startup that are saying or telling the oligarchs in the oil industry that we can actually have RE technology. So that's one. Two, again, talk about money. So how we will really profit if we're going to support the transition into RE? How can we provide jobs out of it? And socially, um, why is it also that we have to continue talking about climate change to act on climate mitigation, climate adaptation socially? Because the thing is, when people read the news or watch television, they they go when they go online, they tend to have a behavioral shift if they see uh, things being talked about largely by a community that they believe in. I, you guys have probably heard it, but as of now, in the age of fake news, and it's something that I have to talk about too, because um, you have to anticipate skeptics capitalizing on the emergence of fake news. So uh, it will be very easy again to have climate skeptics funding bloggers and then pseudo journalists to just post and publish fake news, and people will lap it up, especially with we have the leaders right now in Southeast, not just America, but also in Southeast Asia, because Duterte for one still on the fence, who still haven't really climate change. So if you have fake news going on, um, there's a study going on right now, and I think it's one study that has caught the attention of journalists like us, is that you cannot really convince the public to believe in what you say and what you report about it, even if you've researched about it, even if you've almost uh, lost your life of it. They wouldn't really listen to you if you're going to um, just talk about the facts. It's not the way to do it anymore. Facts are never enough nowadays, sad to say. Okay? You have to look more at the things that unite people rather than the things that divide them. And the same applies to climate change reporting. The thing is that report, I'm sorry, it was on my top of my head, but the study was saying that people operate in tribes. So there's always more security and safety in tribes. And if you're going to spew facts that go against what the tribe believes in, you're just going to alienate them. So focus on the things that unite people more than the things that divide them. For example, talk about, let's go to finance, let's go to money. There are people saying, okay, if you go to R, it will be too expensive. Of course, you're saying that eventually money will come out of it, and the market is showing that there's interest right now, but that's not the case for the region. At least here in Southeast Asia, that's not yet the case. So how are you going to report out in a way that will actually have more people believing that it can happen and that there's money in it? I said earlier that go local, right? Go talk to someone, a local businessman was actually already done something, and that this businessman is someone everyone can relate to. Okay, when I say everyone, okay, when this businessman isn't really like someone who has political baggage, if you know what I mean. Okay, this businessman has a story to tell like anyone else, probably a rags to riches story. This businessman work hard to make sure that the RE technology that he's investing on will work. Those are the values of hard work, okay, innovation, of success. So if you report in a way that highlight these values while also giving them the facts, more people may listen more. And just because if you're just going to give them RE will or cut emissions by this, but the facts will not be enough. But if you talk about Mr. or Johnson Pedro from blah 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 27 saw that stocks are going down when it comes to when he's investing in the stocks for the oil industry, blah blah blah. So he decided instead to put his $5 or whatever, how much, or 500 ringgit or 500 pesos, whatever, on this little startup company on RE. And after how many months, after how many years, he saw that there's really potential. Who wouldn't want to get rich, but and also try to the earth at the same time. So these are values that everyone else will share. Get rich, and if you can, why not? Okay. So learn to also be innovative now as a journalist. Um, learn learn who your audience is, what makes them think, and what makes them tick, and what makes them act. So those are the things that I will primarily tell them to do or consider.
Thanks, Purple. I think that was a very comprehensive overview of how we can, write about climate change. I like the points about, making it sexy for a particular audience, making it relatable to them. Also, if you talk about climate change, don't push facts in because, some people might be turned off actually with the facts, don't want to read your article because it's not going to be interesting for them. It's not going to convince them to believe in climate change or to shift to renewable energy, for example. So I think my next question for Ben actually is, having worked in Greenpeace Southeast Asia for quite some time and having seen, different media coverage of movements, of different projects going on, of, campaigns from environmental advocates, are there any good examples that you can think of where media coverage or journalism has helped movements with their advocacies or helped change policies? How has media become effective in the environmental movement in Southeast Asia?
Okay, thanks for that question, Ayin. But before I answer that question, can I add something to what Purple said?
Sure.
Yeah, actually, there's based from our experience. There's a very good story that we discovered. I think this was last year, 2016, when we went around some parts of the Philippines to document existing renewable energy plants, primarily wind and solar. So there's this town in Guimaras in the Visayas. It's called San Lorenzo. It is the host community of a wind power plant. I think it's around 54 megawatts, if I'm not mistaken. So you have, I think, 30 wind turbines scattered around this town and other parts of Guimaras. And so we were able to talk to the mayor, and we asked him, so how has the installation or the construction of this wind farm affected your community? Are there complaints? The usual questions. And he said, actually, we never expected that this wind farm will actually bring in more money for us. So he said that their municipality used to be a fifth-class municipality. In the Philippines, it means that your town is very poor. It's on the lower rung of the economic indices. But now, according to the mayor, from a fifth-class municipality or from a fifth-class town, their town is already a second-class municipality. So it jumped a couple of notches, no? Because of two things. One, the income from the tax and other revenues by the wind power plant. That's the first reason. And second, their town is now already a tourist destination because of the wind farms. Just like what happened to the wind farms in northern Philippines in Ilocos Norte. So what I'm trying to say here is that to answer your question, Ayin, is that positive news or positive media coverage is one of the most important things that we need to keep in mind. No? So uh, coal itself as an issue, you will never run out of bad stories to tell, like who got harassed, who got killed, all of these issues about land grabbing, climate change, etc., etc. And sometimes the psychological impact of that to your readers or to your viewers, if you're using other forms, no, is it can really disempower people. So what we want is our positive stories that are empowering. So I use that as an example because this is one good example of how renewable energy uh, can actually change the lives and the economic condition of a of a small town, no, in the Philippines, of a rural town. So for me, it's a very good example of how uh, one can look at uh, these stories from a human interest story. Uh, that town, uh, before the installation of the wind farms, is only known for its salt farms. So you have salt being produced in that area. So most of the people were poor, but because of the wind farm, they're now able to have extra income without necessarily stopping from doing their traditional livelihood, which is salt farming. So it's a very good case of uh, nature, communities, and technology coexisting in one place and changing the lives of people for the better. Now, of course, it's there's the danger, no, there's the danger of sugarcoating these stories. So it's also important to balance this kind of stories with what is happening in other parts of the region, for instance. So what I'm trying to say is that uh, a good way to tell the narrative on climate and energy in Southeast Asia is to start with this positive and inspiring stories, because you can always insert, the negative stories, somewhere in the middle or towards, the end of your story, but you're able to get the attention of your readers. Now, I think an example that I can use aside from the one that I mentioned is how the break free from fossil fuels campaign that we did with several groups this year, including Dakila, Climate Reality Project, WWF, Philippine Movement for Climate Justice, and many other groups. So we know that the issue of coal is a complicated and sometimes even a disheartening story for many countries in Southeast Asia, no? And that's also true for the Philippines. And what we did is, instead of focusing on that aspect, we focused on how communities, grassroots communities, people's organizations are actually coming together, looking at this issue as part of a national and global narrative, instead of just looking at this as a not in my backyard issue. So putting together all of these experiences and the sharing, the camaraderie, so different localities from the north meeting people from the south and sharing stories about their struggles is one way to tell the story about this broad movement of people, of grassroots organizations fighting against fossil fuels and the impacts of climate change. So what we have here is a story of empowerment, a story that will inspire people to tap into their own experiences as a resource for them to become part of that Southeast Asian narrative that is unique to this region of fighting coal and at the same time promoting renewable energy.
All right. Thanks for that. And I really like the point about making it positive for the viewers, especially about renewable energy, because it is easy to write negative things about coal and fossil fuel, but to probably incite a more positive view on why people should support renewable energy is something that is a good framing. And I think for purple, Ben said earlier that we have to make sure that stories are also balanced, that it's not just sugar coating, or it's not just full on negative news. So as for your experience, how can you advise us how to write a balanced story, not reflecting maybe too much our own opinion or our own political stand? How it's quite difficult, but how do we do it?
Just try to answer the question how. Okay, let me point out in a more specific way. When you ask how, you probe more into the nitty-gritty of an issue, incident, or an event that transpired, which only showed affected lives, essentially. Okay, for example, if this has been happening, disasters have been happening for the longest time. Okay, and people have been dying. People have been losing their homes. Okay, it's a story that has been told over the years. Okay, before Yolanda, after Hayan. But when you started, if you start your report by trying to answer the question how, then you will not only achieve a balance in reporting, show people one, the role in these things, and second, the big picture also. How did the local politicians act before any disaster happened? They have the information. What did they do with it? After the disaster happened and so many people died and there were so many losses, did they try to help those who were affected? And then after that, how did the local government and then the national government and then the international community, how did they all try to act on, learn the lessons first, and then act on the lessons that they should have learned from this incident? And then not just disasters also, but also on things that are already there. So you have the Paris Agreement now in place, and you have developing countries and developed countries still debating over how to implement it, right? So ask the question, how does your country aim to implement it? Um, by trying, getting the details, interviewing to key people, researching all the information that you need to have that question answered, then you will be able to show, one, that wow, it's great that we're doing something, but second, you will talk about it in a way that will not just turn into another motherhood statement that, oh, we're doing about climate change, great, because you're trying to question the answer how, and how goes beyond the feel good statements. Motherhood statements will work for Miss University pageants, but not for really good news reports or news articles. So just try to answer the question how. We want to do something good, but how will we do it? We want to mitigate climate change. How will we do it? We want to stop the players from the dirty energy industry. How will we do it? Okay. The question how will lead to the why, and the why is understood by everyone else. Why should we keep on reporting about climate change in a balanced manner? Why? Because we want to save generations from suffering from the worst effects and impacts of climate change. The why can the why is something that people will believe in, or the answer to the question why is something that people will better understand if we also explain to them the how of the issue.
All right. I think that was a very helpful, actually, very practical, asking the how and then the why after the how. And I think we'll have our last questions for Ben and Purple. So first for Ben, so now our trackers are going to write and publish articles on renewable energy until maybe mid-July. So are there any current issues or topics on coal and renewable energy in Southeast Asia that they should follow or that they can actually write about?
Yep. The one that was mentioned by Purple earlier, which I also discussed. What unites the issue in coal-fired power plants in Southeast Asia is not so much on climate impacts as of the moment, but it's actually the pollution, no, air pollution coming from these coal-fired power plants. Based from our experience in Greenpeace, this is the one that actually gets the attention of more people, especially in urban areas, because most of these coal-fired power plants are built outside of urban areas, and hence only a few people know about uh, uh, the impacts, or sometimes people don't even know where their electricity comes from. That can also be a good starting point on a story. Do you know where your electricity comes from? But going back to air pollution, I think that's one of the hottest trends in terms of talking about the issue of coal, not just in Southeast Asia, but globally. You know, there are a lot of studies that have been done that can provide the information that's needed for this kind of stories. For renewable energy, one of the angles that can be explored is the emerging markets for renewable energy in Southeast Asia. Uh, One story that we can look as an example is how young entrepreneurs that have invested in renewable energy are shaping the landscape of renewable energy in Southeast Asia. For instance, in the Philippines, you have the likes of Leandro Leviste, the president of Solar Philippines, who's only 25 years old, but he's leading one of the most aggressive, if not successful, solar companies in the Philippines. So this kind of stories, sort of packaging renewable energy as a hip and trendy investment for millennials, can be a one way to tell story about renewable energy. We can talk about cafes and malls that have gone solar. Uh, uh, Again, I'll be using the example of the Philippines because this is the one that I'm most familiar of. You have several malls in the Philippines that have already installed their own solar rooftop. So these are trends that we can explore, write about. Or I know in Thailand, there are already coffee shops, and even in Jakarta, in Indonesia, cafes outside Jakarta that have already installed solar power plant in their rooftops. Uh, for our Malaysian friends, you can write about the Kuala Lumpur International Airport also installing their solar power plant on their rooftop. If I'm not mistaken, it's around 20 kilowatts. So, all of these things that you can relate renewable energy to entrepreneurship, to travel, to hipster culture, to uh, technology. No, these are all possible angles because, yeah, I agree that actually one observation about talking about climate change is that when you start talking about climate change, usually most people don't know where to start because it's a very huge problem, as we all know. So start by looking at it from this, uh, you know, probably small steps how they can take action. Uh, what's important about writing these stories is that uh, you always ask your audience to take action, because I think this is what it is all about. It's you can write a very good story, a very good narrative about renewable energy in your province or in your city, but it's more important that you ask your readers or your viewers, what can you do? What can you do to contribute to the solution? And I think that's one way that we can involve more people in this movement.
All right, thanks, Ben. So I think our trackers already have a lot of topics, ideas that they can write about. And yes, remember that we always need to have like call to action, or let our readers think, what they can do for on climate change, on renewable energy, etc. And for purple, the last question actually is, so given all these, maybe we already have a topic, we already have an idea what we want to write about, but how do we actually publish it? A lot of trackers ask us, because they're not full-time journalists, how do we write to editors? How do we pitch our stories? How do we get published in good newspapers or good journalism websites? How do we do it?
I assume all of us are already on Facebook and we have Twitter accounts. Maximize your Facebook and Twitter accounts, even your IG. But let me delve more into how can use Facebook and Twitter. I do not have the list of all the email addresses of all editors of all publications or news organizations in the world. It's tough to get their personal email addresses, but lo and behold, if you go to Facebook, just type in their names, and um, most likely they're there. No, they have their own accounts, their own Twitter. So it wouldn't hurt if you send them a simple message. Write a story in a way where you will explain, one, first who you are, and what the story is about in a very specific way. Do not tell, I want to write about climate change. Thank you. That will not work. Oh, you want to write about what facet of climate change and why. Okay, why is this important? Be as specific as you can. So if you're going to pitch something, my advice really is you have to pitch in a story or pitch a story that you really believe in. If they have questions about it, if you don't really believe in how important the issue you wanted to report about, if you don't really believe in how important it is, then chances are you won't be able to convince the editor if they try to shut you down. But the story right now is the rise of terrorism in Southeast Asia. Why would we place a story on climate change in our news site? I mean, we wouldn't get any clicks. Realistically speaking, clicks. Okay, they need they need site views, and they need more social stories that will give them a higher social media following and presence. So try to address those factors that also matter to news organizations. Of course, climate change is an important issue, one of the most important things or issues, topics that journalists should focus into. But editors also have other things in mind. So how will you convince editors? So write your pitch in a way where it will show that this is connected to this, and that you have to believe in it so much that you can defend it. No matter how much they try to put you down, or no matter how much they try to say no, 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 it will happen 3 times, 4 times. Write again and say, refine the way you pitch your story. So that's it. Maximize your Facebook accounts. Just send them a message, tweet them. They will reply. I'm telling you, they will. Like, hey, I'm Purple, I'm from Manila, blah, 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 I want to. And they will give you the time of the day. So, having said that, make sure that aside from doing your research, aside from already preparing your interviews, aside from writing a really succinct but comprehensive story pitch, make your Facebook account or Twitter account look as professional as possible. if you have a picture of yourself in a SpongeBob costume, no, in your Facebook or Twitter account, I don't really know if they will respond to you or if they will take you seriously. Or worst case scenario, you have an egg account, you're just an egg. No one would like to talk to an egg. Okay, so prepare your accounts. Show to them that, hey, I'm real. I know what I'm talking about. I can write about it. And be prepared to be rejected. It's okay to be rejected. Just refine your pitch. And then, last but not the least, um, if the news organization locally says no because they have other matters to look into, it will happen. I mean, local news organizations will prioritize the things that are happening right now in the country. For example, in the Philippines, the war on drugs, it's the Maute group. If they reject you, do not be afraid to try and ask other organizations abroad. Okay, because in Southeast Asia, climate change is still one of the top or the key issues that news organizations are looking into. Siya, News Asia always has space for climate change. And then Myanmar, in Myanmar, Irrawaddy, um, Jakarta, I think, because environment reporting is one of the areas where it's considered highly dangerous to be actually a part of. So there will always have space for good environmental stories. And then last again, sorry, I said last but not the least, but just need to emphasize, learn to link the climate change issue into another issue, to other issues, like what Ben said earlier on. You have entrepreneurs, you have communities, to show to all your readers, to the young ones, to the old ones, that climate change affects your life in so many ways. So give a damn about it. That's it.
Thanks, Purple. I think that was very, very practical, very good advice. And so the trackers should be able to stalk their editors on Twitter and on Facebook. I do have my editors on Facebook. So when I'm thinking of ideas, my editors will just actually message me on Facebook telling me, hey, write a story and I'll publish it today. So I really think that's helpful. I think it's very practical to do it that way. All right, Arthur, you've been quiet all along. Do we have any questions from trackers, or do you actually want to ask questions to Ben and Purple?
Yeah, so I've been quiet. I've been listening very carefully. I must say I've really enjoyed what you've said. It was very comprehensive, very exhaustive as well. I think you mentioned all the most important you could give to us. I saw that there was no questions so far. We might get questions later, and then maybe we'll find a way to answer them anyway. One final question I have for the both of you, sort of as a summarizing question. I think you've answered most of it already, but if one of our trackers would write an article and would send it to you, and you have, let's say, only 5 minutes time to go through that article and see if it's worth publishing or not, what would be the main characteristics or the main things you would look at? If it's like 5 things you can mention, like I would look at this and this and this, to judge if an article is worthy for publishing or not.
You want to go first, Purple? That's a tough question.
Sorry. Actually, I was about to say, can you repeat the last bit because I wasn't able to catch it. Arthur, I hope you don't mind, but can you just repeat what you said, like the 5 things, something about the 5 things?
So it really relates to the last beautiful speech you gave, actually. But I was just wondering if you could sort of summarize what you said there in like 5 bullet points, let's say, of things trackers really need to look at when they write an article. And for example, they send an article to you. What 5 main points would you look at to decide if this article is good enough or not to be published in your channel?
Okay. Well, will our audience be interested in it? Right? Will someone actually get to read it, or will someone would want to watch it? That's the first question that people who pitch stories should ask. think about. So consequently, if that's the main question that we need to address, the next question will be how do I make it interesting? Okay. Let me try to give you an issue. Okay, let's say you want to write about climate adaptation, but you are not an environmental reporter. You haven't had any experience writing prior to this one. You didn't have any experience publishing stories or anything of that sort in any news organization. So how are you gonna convince an editor that hey, please publish or use my story in climate adaptation? Okay, so I want to write about climate adaptation, but can you tell me? Can you explain it in the simplest possible and explain it in a way where give me a really good case study? Okay, so climate adaptation, specifically on a project being led by a women's organization here in this in your community. Why is this unique? Why is this unique? I mean, there are lots of climate change adaptation programs that have already been implemented by many groups already. So what makes this unique? Tell me more about the women's group. Okay, who is this women's group and what makes what is about their experiences that should be learned by other people? This women's group was established after this disaster or after this typhoon, and because the typhoon has changed the sources of income in this community, they decided to build their own group, and now they're looking into ways to adapt to climate change in a way that reflects their strength as a women's group, strength reflects their culture also. And if you start to write your pitch in that way, then as an editor, I will think, this isn't just about climate change. This is about women finding or shaping their roles in a different way as women in the community. This is about women and this is about women and empowerment. And this is about not experts already knowing what to do. This we're not talking about people with PhD or degrees or people who are like Elon Musk or people who are elected into office and have the power, the wherewithal to implement climate change related programs. This is about ordinary folks. Okay, giving it their best to find a way to solve one of the biggest problems of our time in their own way, in their own backyard, affecting their own lives and the lives of the people they care about. So if you give me a pitch that is like that, hey, then there's space for that story in our news organization. Um, it's always about connecting. How do you connect to your reader? How do you connect to the viewer? Okay. I can see your face crunching, but it sounds difficult, but it isn't. Because you will develop the nose for news eventually. It may be a little bit too general for the public, but as you go along, you will develop it and you will be able to give a pitch that will just reader needs and will also match what the audience wants. Okay. So that's it. Um, make it more local, make it more local to will connect to the audience. Tell us why it will matter to the audience. Okay? And diversify on your case studies. Do not just run after again, do not just run after the people who have developed the expertise or the technology or already in power or the presidents of what are these organizations, the presidents of these countries. Diversify the sources of the content, diversify our content. So those are the top three. If you need two more, I can add, but those are the top essential things that I think an editor would want to see in a pitch. Okay, and then top again, number 4. Tell us how we're gonna do it. Just we need a deadline, right? News organizations work on a deadline. So if you say I want to write about blah blah, and then you tell us, but I can only go to the community in 2 weeks or so, or it will be actually tough to talk to get quotes from their leader, or because they have these considerations. So we need to know how can you actually do it. You have this good idea, but can you prove to us that you can deliver? Need to tell us in that picture. Oh, next week I will go to them and I will already talk to them and give get initial information. So it's essential. I'll tell, okay, so this guy knows what he's talking about. One, two, he can actually, okay, can actually to get the story, to write the article or to do their TV report, the news report. So that's it. And then 5, because you're asking for top 5, um, well, is it important that you make it as local as possible just so you can connect more with the audience? Number 5 is scale it up. Also tell the editor why, in a broader manner, why looking at this local story is also important to international audience. A story for one, a pitch. If I'm going to write a pitch, the big story, the big picture is China has now emerged as the leader in climate action because Trump, the US, they have withdrawn. Even if it will take into effect in 2020, I mean, looking at the legalism of it all, we all know that Paris Agreement, you have rules and they cannot really extract immediately or immediately withdraw or abandon the Paris Agreement right away. But, okay, so China has emerged as the leader already here in climate action. Um, how will I find a local tone to that one? Well, China is also has been big into lending money or extending loans to different countries in Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. And you know what? Our president and Xi Jinping been best friends so far. Okay, the Philippines said they have received X billion number of loans or X billion amount of loans from China. Okay, so make it more local. Um, I found a guy. Who will be hired by a company supported by these Chinese loans under the condition only that should be able or must be willing, okay, to relearn what he knew about energy already. This mid-level executive guy who worked in the energy industry for the longest time, but then there comes this attractive offer from a company supported by a Chinese loan. Think the way he sees the industry, right? So, will he be willing to do it? So that's the case study. Okay. Mr. Arthur, okay, who was on whatever annually working for the big players in the industry, blah 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 blah, is willing. He said is reconsidering, okay, leaving the industry and then joining this newly minted company funded by a Chinese because he said, well, of course there's money because Chinese in the Philippines will be enjoying good relations for the next 6 years. So he saw the opportunity transitioning to RE without the usual headaches that come along with it. Okay. So it's a story that has the big picture, but it's also a story that can connect more with the audience. If you really still want to go more local, do not talk to the mid-level executive. Talk to the employee who will work for it who does not know anything about RE, but since it offers an employment opportunity, is willing to learn about RE. Okay, so a jeepney driver who has driven his jeepney for 20 years, has sent his children to school by driving a jeepney that, as we all know, use oil and depends on oil. But suddenly, there's this government initiative to abandon public transportation that depends on oil. And you have, as a jeepney driver, he needs to learn how to drive or transportation that depends on solar energy. Okay, so how will he adapt to this change, and why is this important? Okay. Actually, the jeepney driver story is already being we already did the story because we think it's important. You just don't tell a guy driving for 20 years that you're gonna lose your job. You have to let go of that old jeepney of yours because you have to learn how to drive an electric vehicle now. Okay? I think that it's something that will connect to anyone who has a family, who needs money to feed their family. It will also connect also to anyone who's familiar with tragedy, especially if you're from the Philippines. If you talk to the jeepney driver, but you will help out people not prevent, but you will help the next generations lessen the impacts or the, the impacts or the effects of climate change. If you talk to the jeepney driver like that, he will tell you, who cares, right? I don't care. I only care about money and sending my children to school. Uh, so, but you wanted to highlight again climate change in it. So you're going to say, of course, as a jeepney driver, that's your main concern. Okay. But on the other hand, you also need to learn this innovation because this is what the government wants to do. This is what China wants to do, and China is friends with the government, with our government. So how are you gonna adapt? Okay, it's not a black and white look into the issue. It's a story with lots of grace in it, and it's a story that humanizes the issue that will matter to a bigger audience. Was that more clear? Maybe I'm crunching because you still have more questions, but it's okay. Keep
Yeah,
on
I
asking.
think that's amazing. That's amazing. I think I'll have to stop you here because I think your insights and your it's a really passionate speech you just gave as well, and it actually really helps for me personally, but I think for our trackers as well to understand how you need to develop a complex story and how to understand how an editor sees it as well, which buttons to push, how to get through to editors and to the general public. I think it was a very comprehensive talk. I don't know, Ben, if you still have anything to add. Maybe you can add one more thought and not five.
Yeah, yeah,
Soon.
yeah. I was gonna say that Purple has already mentioned all the things. Actually, more than the things that I wanted to say. Maybe what I can add to that is, for me, if I'm gonna look at an article, my dictum in for that article to be something that's worth publishing or looking into is, how does this article make the odd familiar, and how does this article make the familiar become an ally. So I think one thing or a couple of things that I'd like to add to what Purple has already mentioned is that, if I'm going to look at that article, is there someone that I know that is in that story? Probably a celebrity, or a movie star, someone that I know, or even a politician, a mayor or a governor, because these are people that your readers will be generally interested in, and how are they connected to the issue of climate change, to the issue of renewable energy. And I think the one last thing that I'd like to add is that if you can have photos or videos, that will really be excellent, because it really adds a lot of weight to the storytelling. I know that in some cases it can be limited given the space constraints, but it will not hurt if you submit your stories with photos. That makes it more appealing visually, and it also makes it more relatable to people. Just by looking at the photo, you're already able to tell half of your story. So I think that's just what I want to add.
Two good add-ons to a very long list already. And I have no more questions. Ayin, do you have any more questions? Or
No, I'm good. I think we had a very good webinar today. So again, thank you to Ben and to Purple for joining us and helping our trackers, publish their stories on renewable energy in Southeast Asia. And for our trackers, so just to wrap it up, in order to apply for the workshop and join us here in the Philippines, you need to go to app.climatetracker.org, create an account, and then log in and apply to the Southeast Asia workshop. Of course, you need to publish an article to be able to join us here in the Philippines, but our deadline is on July 12th. So you have a few more days to write and publish your articles. And Arthur, any last reminders for our trackers?
yeah, I just saw that somebody asked a question about the deadline again, but I think you sort of solved that issue now. The deadline is the 12th of July, indeed. And they were a bit confused about the pitch to editors. Usually it's easier to first pitch to editors to find out if they're actually interested in your story before you send them the whole article that is already finished. But if you've already written the full article, sometimes it's also useful to send the full article and not only pitch, so they can actually see what they're dealing with. If you have any more questions on that, please write to us directly. And I think that's all for now for the stories.
All
so
right,
I'd like to thank you again. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Arthur.
to those who have questions for Ben and for Purple, you can stalk them on Facebook. They're on Facebook. They're also on Twitter. So you can just tweet them or message them on Facebook. But thanks for joining us tonight and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.